Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that I should not be writing about now. It's a game that should have been delayed until the development team were ready to ship, not management. A game so hyped and advertised as the next leap in open world role-playing, proudly sporting that Cyberpunk name and brand, is merely a vague attempt at ambition and a clear indication that there is a larger issue within video games that needs to be addressed. In Cyberpunk 2077, you play V, an upcoming merc who meets his friend Jackie after a gig gone awry. In my case, I was stealing the same car as him and got caught.
Don't move! You're under arrest!
Turns out both V and Jackie have similar aspirations in life and set out to conquer Night City from the ground up. After a brief montage of events, you're thrust into Jackie's latest scheme, working with the legendary fixer Dex Deshawn. This stuff is good stuff. It's filled with the bullshit heist setups that I really enjoy and really shows off the game's systems to mask the transitions between choices made. You might end up with the same points as other players, but the dialogue varies between each interaction depending on what actions you took. This is about the most the choice system has as an effect on the overall story, but we'll get back to it. The heist you go on is for a biochip, currently in possession by Cyberpunk's regular villain, Arasaka Corporation. Things go south, Jackie gets hit, dying in the getaway vehicle, the chip's container is also damaged, and to keep it going, has to be slotted into V or everything else will be for naught. CD Projekt Red obviously wanted Jackie dying to be a big thing. For this entire introductory section, I was with Jackie for about 6 hours in total before I saw the title card. But the issue is, within those 6 hours, they didn't build a character, but a vehicle to attempt to elicit feelings. Outside of this baseline version of Jackie that they've presented, I don't know who he is. Outside of the fact that he's a crook with a heart of gold and he's V's friend, he's nothing. Mostly because the montage of what you assume is to get to know him happens so fast and has such little information in it that killing him off is entirely useless. Everything surrounding his death afterwards, like going to his funeral and looking through his stuff to find out what kind of person he was, feels like regret by the writers that they didn't expand on the character when they could have done. This halting of characters and stories to quickly move on to the next thing is a motif the game unfortunately takes on for the better part of most of the game, and the other quests fall into this trap as well. The only character this doesn't apply to is Johnny Silverhand, Keanu Reeves' character, who is pretty much the only one that never flipped out via glitches on me either. Johnny is trapped on the biochip, and after V is shot dead, it kicks into overdrive and begins eating away at V's brain to replace it with Johnny, the intended purpose of the chip.
You weren't dreaming, V. Those were memories. There's a personality construct on that shard. Dreams you had were from his past.
Hang on. You mean to say there's an actual terrorist in my head? Right now?
That's right, Johnny Silverhand. Had his crowning moment about 50 years ago. AHQ bombing. Heard of it? It's his doing. People say he was buried under the rubble.
From the outset, Johnny is upset about being trapped and V is scared about dying. They butt heads over decisions, with Johnny acting as the devil on your shoulder through most of your interactions in the game, chiming in with his cynical thoughts wherever you go, and it's often really great.
What a shit-eating rat. He's about to either scream or run. Shut him up already.
Keanu Reeves is not the best actor. His range is limited, and I think he knows that, even while playing Silverhand himself. He's not a mean-spirited person, and this absolutely feels out of his comfort zone, where he'd be more fitting to a softer character.
Not every day a half-brain dead dude drags me around a cat house in a wild horn chase. So having a grand old time.
But as the game progresses, that begins to melt away, especially as they begin to write Johnny as a more sympathetic but stubborn guy.
Better now?
A bit. But let's say it was my real grave. What would you write? Here lies Johnny Silverhand.
The guy who saved my life.
V, you don't know how much I want that to be true. Listen, I realize I fucked up a lot of things. Either let down or used every last person who gave me their trust. Blind, selfish bastard that I was. But I've managed one thing for now. Not to fuck this up. What we have.
Credit where credit is due, though, for both Reeves and CD Projekt Red, that he hasn't cursed this game with the Kojima effect. Casting a high-profile actor and then they're barely around for the length of your game is always sucked about Metal Gear Solid 5 and Death Stranding. Sure, Johnny is not always around, and in some quests barely shows up, but he's in it for the long haul when needed and is a great foil to the more mensch-like V.
Chill, Johnny. Misaka scum to you, I know that. But Goro's not a bad guy.
Not a bad guy. He was Saburo fucking Arasaka's bodyguard. Think his pretty eyes landed in that gig?
The story of V, however, is more like a dot-to-dot picture to complete, and it's one about success and failure within a world that no longer cares for you. It is not particularly deep, but the main questline has enough slingshot and whiplash moments of sending you one way only to rip you back with the casualness of a few sentences that I really did enjoy my time with the story. This really shines in the side quests though. These little pockets of story all come with various spins and roundabouts that the main quest does, just without any of the V is gonna die soon agency. Characters really begin to get developed in ways that I didn't expect after the abrupt introduction and death of Jackie in the game's first few hours. River, a cop who is investigating the disappearance of his nephew, drew ire from me personally. There's a Bruce Lee tone-deaf line of "not all cops are bad" in the game, written and released in the last couple years, but eventually as events play out, whenever he cropped up, I always rushed to his aid because the story genuinely told a gripping tale within this cyberpunk world. Not because it was a cop story in a different coating, but because it begins to morph into a scary take on crime in a cyberpunk environment, and also fleshes out the world in a way that I never really considered before. Nearly every story thread captivated me for however long it went on for. It's just a shame that the only consistent thing among them is at the end abruptly, and some without any satisfactory conclusion. Not even in like a potential, there's the cliffhanger in the thing and we're gonna solve it in the DLC scenario, but you know, the book closes and that's just it. For example, there's a story about politicians investigating the murder of a previous mayor and weirdness going on with their security team that just...
Take care, V. Good luck.
And good night.
So, thoughts?
Ends with a few flecks of story meat thrown your way during the credits. However, as the game's stories are good, they fall into issues surrounding Cyberpunk as a series, games, and fiction, as well as the genre as a whole. Whether intentional or not, the game is racist, and this stems from a westernized, predominantly white viewpoint of the world. Regardless of what skin color or who you create, the world is always going to be seen as a white man's world. This is just due to who wrote the game and who potentially worked on the game. There's the case of the Japanese and Asian cultures that have long been a part of American landscapes and are still seen and presented as ill-fitting pieces in the overall final picture. The Tiger Claws, an established Japanese group, speak entirely in Japanese or thick, heavy accents. Considering America's history with Asian culture, especially Japanese immigration dating back to the 19th century, you'd think there'd be someone without that stereotypical accent to interact with whenever you kill a group or get mixed up with them. I think the only Asian character that I spoke to that didn't have some sort of accent was one of the politicians. There's also the case of the Voodoo Boys, a group that has taken the name off of Cyberpunk 2020's group that was mostly made up of white people obsessed with net running in a similar way of seeing it as voodoo, which is just, you know, it was highlighting cultural appropriation during the 80s. Here, with so many years between 2020 and 2077, the Voodoo Boys are now a group of Haitian refugees set up in Pacifica, a derelict, abandoned and half-built resort that was abandoned by Night City due to a lack of funding. It's basically anarchy in nature, cops don't go there, and is now home to a myriad of people revolving around the Voodoo Boys themselves. It seems that they've done a great job at representing Creole, the language that they speak, but something always feels off, and it's something that the game continuously does over and over. It never tackles what it presents. You get the baseline gist that there's a reason these victims of global warming, Haiti for some reason has just sunk into the ocean, are now in this futuristic American poverty because of a lack of care. It never digs deeper. It never digs into why Placide has to supply his people with meat that has to be butchered in a dirty back room, or why he has to hunt and hack for medication or cash. A few lines of dialogue here, environmental storytelling there, but never the needed stab that Cyberpunk as a genre is supposed to utilize. There's zero commentary via the fiction on the state of the world. In fact, a majority of the in-game advertising seemingly focused on CD Projekt Red's take on Cyberpunk is that of sex, drugs, and guns. For a story built on transhumanism, death, and the future, it rarely even touches on these concepts outside of utilizing them to progress the plot within the sci-fi confines that it presents. And what it does focus on is embarrassing. Like, this is stuff that I wouldn't even expect from the pits of the mind of a horny teenager who thinks that Johnny Silverhand is the coolest motherfucker going. If the trio of choices of ads to see in the game weren't limited to just this, it'd be fine, but it is constant. They're not even good at the critical analysis of sex sells, it's just cringe-inducing in a bad way. Everything it presents, including the enjoyable stories, never say anything at all. It's a vast, complex web of things to say, see, experience, and it is just the baseline as it can possibly be. I wonder if it began digging into the nuances of corporations, PR, futurism, poverty, and capitalism, and, all the things Johnny Silverhand abhors, yet rarely gets any deeper than they fucked us over is a strategic move on CD Projekt Red's part. If you surface yourself to the audience while being critical of your business, would it backfire and land you in deeper, hotter water than you're currently facing? Cyberpunk 2077 has a large, open world with a myriad of things to do. You can take gigs from various factions that litter the city to enjoying the day-to-day, or at least that's what the introductory montage suggests that you can do at the start of the game. From here, it's a meager pittance of offerings, mostly ranging from being told to kill someone or talk to someone. Sometimes when traversing the uniquely brilliant looking but ultimately dead city, you'll have the option to kill people doing some crime. It's antiquated and precious in a way. This would be okay if the combat was at all any good. I've seen Reddit posts of people saying that the combat is fine, showing off moves and bunny hopping of high level characters, but the real truth is you have to properly exert yourself and go out of your way just to ensure that the game is remotely fun or engaging during any combat. It should be a tense moment when a massive mech that can pulverize you into a million tiny pieces with just a couple seconds wind up enters the fray, but it's just a numbers game. Tension of a world that could kill you at any minute with a stray bullet, as they keep harping on about, is taken away as the health bar at the top of your screen and all the enemies take precedent. When it works, combat generally boils down to staying in cover or hidden for as long as possible for you to shoot or use quick hacks to down your foes. There's little reason to use the slide, which, when I upgraded my character with a host of different augments like slow motion when caught, extra health due to being given harder skin, it made little to no difference on the overall experience of being caught up in a monster firefight with someone suffering from cyberpsychosis or sneaking my way into a warehouse to upload a virus. Even when going heavy on stealth, there's very little options for going in without even touching someone. Guards stood forever in front of computers, destined to aimlessly wander the same path or sit in an animation they won't leave. The only way to get by is to take them out. It doesn't help that in the 1.04 version that I played, the enemy AI for when I went stealth during particularly heavy enemy moments was so thick that it didn't matter how I tackled them because of their tunnel vision. Seriously, in 2020, I'm looking at vision cones in a massive AAA game. This certainly harkens back to the Cyberpunk tabletop RPG where it's encouraged to be violent, but in the confines of a video game, supposedly offering multiple ways of completing a task, having to creep up on dudes until you get caught and have to go loud becomes boring. Every boss fight I encountered in Cyberpunk was horrendous. Large, hulking, spongy enemies that do nothing remotely interesting in a way that actually it's quite laughable. This kind of effect also mirrors onto the regular enemies you fight, who all just do the same thing regardless of faction. Even those that can hack you pose little difference in combat, as it never really matters in the grand scheme of things. You'll rarely find yourself thinking strategically, as hovering a mouse over someone and watching the numbers fly out while you pump yourself full of hundreds of health items that litter the place doesn't provide you with the need to. Driving sucks in this game. It sucks and it's weirdly bad. Cars feel heavy, unwieldy, and because the game is so inherently broken, completely untrustworthy. Bikes are a little better as you can avoid traffic via weaving in and out, but you still need to give everything a wide berth if you decide to turn. I also am concerned with the fact that the game offered me driving mission quest lines and single hand-to-hand combat quest lines and also trailing missions in 2020. I built my character around guns, tech, and hacking, with some points going into body, which is strength and health, and crafting. It's my preferred method of playing these games, and it mostly leads you down the paths of being able to open as many doors as you possibly can and interact with any computer or terminal. After a few missions, I began to notice that the computers were almost entirely useless, harboring the same emails and rarely having a connection with the system security that I prefer to disable. While I'd feel the satisfaction of dedicating points into opening doors in various ways, any time spent trying to get embedded into the technical side of the world always felt profoundly wasted until the very last few hours of the game itself. A big portion of why I enjoy Cyberpunk isn't the augments, the violence, and the slang, but the aspects of net running. Jacking into a data port, experiencing another world to aid in your quest against the corpse. A favourite card game of mine, Android Netrunner, had you duking it out with a corp or a runner, aiming to disrupt laid out plans while protecting assets or your meaty sack of flesh that could very easily be fried. Even in the card game space, you got the feeling of the net being a bigger place than it lets on. Ice in your grip. Hacking taking form of viruses that had virtual bodies and personalities to match their abilities, while also dealing with the meat space and the physical actions needed to ensure that you won. Cyberpunk 2077 only flirts with net running. Hacking is a dreadfully dull match the numbers game or quick hacks, pulling from Cyberpunk's world that the net has become isolated outside of local connections. A simple menu where the game slows down as you decide which ability to choose. It doesn't matter if you're a nomad, street kid, or corp, net running is seemingly lukewarm and only used for story sequences. You'll never see the coolest side of Cyberpunk, because the game only glances over briefly for a guided tour. This means you'll disrupt security systems by finding the one laptop in the base and simply turning it off, instead of dealing with meat space and then jacking in to make your run, hoping you don't fry yourself in the process. Quick hacks also only really begin to get useful as you progress through the game. Even very basic hacks like short circuit or reboot optics felt limp, giving me the impression that I had to rely on my own gun skills while I waited for the game to catch up and provide me with quick hacks that deal any damage to make them worth a damn. Also, it's just another path of violence. CD Projekt Red might have a knack for storytelling and masking the variations, but what I noticed in Cyberpunk 2077 is that they absolutely had the twists, turn and roundabout kicks of realization down to a T, but failed with choices. Cyberpunk encourages you to be yourself, mold V into the person you want to see in this grim world. However, outside of very few key conversations, nothing matters. The outcome might have 3 options at one point in missions or quest lines that'll divert in one way, but it consistently feels like you're playing someone else's character and each option leads you down a very funneled path. I have to stress that the game is excellent at masking certain outcomes or events as player choice, like the Maelstrom sequence, where you have to go pick up a device for your fixer, the person you're working with, Dexter Shaw, and the device has already been paid for in full, but as far as I know, the previous leader who got paid is now dead and the new guy wants more cash. I didn't have the eddies. I blew his head off and made off with tons of new enemies and a handy device for an upcoming heist. But my friend, however, had a vastly different experience going from, instead of A to B to C, going from A to B to D to C, with getting another faction involved and that sort of thing. The point is, though, that the ultimate end goal was the same, and I assume that he had a vastly different conversation with Dex at the end, but it all led to that one singular point. It honestly makes me wonder why this is in here, other than CD Projekt Red are now known for making player-driven interactive narratives with branching paths. Whenever Cyberpunk 2077 becomes linear, a little bit more focused, it became a better game. Silverhand's sections that are essentially a shooter are fast-paced and genuinely thrilling. Why? High damage output that makes guns feel impactful. During the heist with Jackie, even if it broke entirely during the fight with the mech, was focused and clear, concise. Small bursts of action with an environment that felt like it could be a little bit more if it was built upon. Even better, the opening mission with Jackie that acts as the tutorial that has an A to B to C type of momentum was far better because it was a closed off section of the game. What I'm saying is that Cyberpunk would have worked better if it was a linear game. All the story threads and things to do could still be there, but the moment to moment gameplay in the massive open world feels old, moldy, and in the way. Rarely does the city feel useful, like it's aiding in anything other than background noise for the sake of having an uber large city. But it feels as if CDPR have backed themselves into a corner here. Everything has to be bigger, better than the last game, than every other game on the market, and it stinks. Faster pace, tighter combat, focus, and less time spent on trying to force something that clearly isn't working would have gone a long way to tell the tale of V in Night City. Entire sequences feel like they're hamstrung by the restrictions of everything having to play by the same rules that also have to dictate the open world. This leaves big moments to putter out as you're left to just saunter into something, rather than be thrust into the next big thing. This is also an issue with the RPGification and trying to justify themselves to the audiences. Hundreds of hours of gameplay should not speak to a person, when it is as flaccid as it is in Cyberpunk 2077. Give me a solid 10-hour campaign with a tight, neat story that actually does something to my brain, rather than presenting me with more and more numbers, skill trees, and a laundry list of things to do. It is obvious CD Projekt Red clearly did not have a grasp on Cyberpunk 2077. For as long as I've skirted around it in this review, the game is a buggy mess that consistently breaks in new and various ways each time that I loaded into it. In fact, it's such a buggy mess that it does deserve the treatment that it has got from retail stores, Sony, and Microsoft. Sometimes a game will be buggy or glitchy in ways that can produce funny moments. People have already begun to milk the teats of Cyberpunk, and boy, every time something comes up, it might not have happened before. However, while games like this, namely Bethesda games, can have game-breaking bugs, very rarely have I experienced a game that just routinely broke itself with no way to progress other than to reload and hope for the best. First time meeting Johnny Silverhand? Stuck on the bed. One time the game couldn't find the Polish language subtitles even though I'm playing in English. Constantly story beats ruined by excessive calls or characters having 6 conversations at once.
Jam-packed with hardware.
Don't lose them, V.
Some scene. Oh, now you're interested.
We could expose a corpo conspiracy.
They don't mass-produce
V.
trucks
I'm
like
telling
those.
you. They could be corpo spies, or who the fuck knows. Earjacking.
T-posing, animation slip-ups, lips not moving at all with the words while riding in cars. There's a thing in the game that weirdly requires you to wait a period of time until the quest giver contacts you. I spent days waiting for one character to call me, only for them to do it mid-mission or during a big moment in the game. And the calls, God help you if you get a call during an end of a mission before you can save, whether because of the combat or not, because the game will not save during a call, I assume, so that it doesn't break. And I had to go back half an hour of progress, travel, searching, etc, to repeat the process over, and then I died and had to do it again. Stuck crouching during a conversation, cars driving off without me as they circle around town to my location. Even during the ending, my character was bald for most of it, even though I purposely gave him the stupidest mohawk I possibly could. It's poor. It really is. This game should not have been released yet. All these issues, and still CD Projekt Red decided that crunching was the best way to attempt to solve them. For a game that had a 7-year development cycle, CD Projekt Red's management fucked up. They initiated an overly long, cruel, and inhuman amount of crunch on Cyberpunk. For those that aren't sure what crunch is, it's where a studio will have employees work overtime to meet milestones, complete games, and that sort of stuff in a short space of time. If a game development is behind in any capacity, a studio will usually go into crunch. Crunch is something that has plagued the industry for years. Publishers having ridiculous expectations of what a game should be in a short amount of time, developers thinking in the short term, and ultimately the only thing it affects is employees. Burnout, mental and physical health being destroyed, even resignation from the industry as a whole are commonplace for studios that value a crunch culture. If you look back to the days of old, a good example would be GT Interactive and Monolith's Blood 2. While the game was a myriad of issues and technical failures, it was developed in 11 months because of the studio's unrealistic expectations for a 3D FPS game at the dawn of the new millennium. It was a buggy mess that had content cut left, right and centre. Activision and Singularity, which I'll have a video on soon, where they gave Raven Software an ultimatum to finish the game in 9 months or not at all. They still had to lay off a portion of staff. More recently, the conversation has arisen around Rockstar and Naughty Dog, two massive studios with delays and years of development for Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Last of Us 2, still implementing crunch to finish the games to attain whatever goal was set by management. Those games still sold by the millions and would have done so regardless of when they released. Crunch is inhuman. Crunch does not work. Cyberpunk 2077 should not have been released in December of 2020. Maybe not until 2022, but they could not release it because management, shareholders, the backlash for each delay from fans, and a closing gap of holiday season which would squander any sales plans that they had, and all the marketing stuff that they'd made with other brands. Well, they fucked up so badly that it's hopefully a wake-up call for everybody involved. But also, I hope this is a wake-up call to the fans to begin understanding how the sausage is made. Game development is not all rainbows, sunshine, and good times. CD Projekt Red played you all for chumps, pretending to be one of the people, addressing you as gamers, while in reality, they were merely running people into the ground so that you coughed up 60 quid on launch day, or by pre-order. It's a play by a massive corporation and ultimately it blew up in their face. I'm hoping that Cyberpunk's level of fuck up will send shockwaves through the industry and everybody to hopefully begin to understand that we need to hold the health and treatment of the developers at these massive studios up to the light and hold management and publishers to a higher standard. The culture the industry has made for itself and wrapped itself in is grotesque. Have a favourite product. Enjoy games. But please begin to realise how bad game development is at various places, and ensure that you make a stink every time working conditions come up, and the more you do, the more hopefully this type of bullshit starts to dissipate in the coming years. In the end, talking about Cyberpunk as a game, even if CD Projekt Red fixed it, the end product is still a limp action RPG with a bland, dead world, with all the problems that came before it, with the genre still plaguing it, and with no self-awareness to tackle those issues either. They're embedded into the game now. Missions, side quests, and every activity you do in the game that isn't talking to folk is something you've seen before, something solved or masked via new systems in other popular games. Cyberpunk 2077 is not a good game. It is an amalgamation of everything wrong with the industry and where it's seemingly plateauing for the time being. It's dull, has zero bite in any capacity, and ultimately fixing it will only reveal that it has a few good storylines to carry its hobbled, disgusting body across its lifespan. It's a symptom of a larger issue within the industry. And again, I hope that Cyberpunk is a wake-up call for CD Projekt Red, the industry, and its audience.
Know what? You're starting to remind me of me, 50 years back. Minus the charisma. An impressive cock.